All right, hello. Welcome to another episode video of Running Gothic. This is the place where I help you incorporate Gothic storytelling into your writing so that way you can make it more powerful and just maybe make it more come alive more. Today, I want to talk about a Gothic movie that I love, that I consider Gothic, and I think it's like we were talking about it now because there's a movie in this franchise that's coming out, and so I want to talk about Alien because I think it is the perfect Gothic science fiction movie. And if you remember in, I think my first video, I talked about Gothic genres. I talked about what Gothic is. I mentioned Gothic genres, and then I talked about them at length in the last one. And one of the genres that I talked about was Gothic science fiction. I think Alien is a perfect encapsulation of Gothic science fiction. It has all the hallmarks. And you have to pardon me because, hey, I'm still new to this. And so I'm looking at some notes here, but I just kind of want to chat about it. And if you've listened to my Speaking of Gothic podcast, well, I did a whole episode on Alien, so this will seem very familiar. But if you don't have any intention on listening to that, or if you've never listened to it, well, then this will be new to you. So, but basically, Alien, 1979, directed by Ridley Scott, the great Ridley Scott. And if you in films in the last 20 years or more, he's made some incredible films, but I think Alien is still one of his best films. And to me, it is the perfect Gothic science fiction film. Just to kind of give you just a little bit of a recap, but it's a movie from 1979, directed by Sir Ridley Scott, and I think it's a masterclass in Gothic horror filmmaking. And it stars Tom Skerrit, Ian Holm, John Hurt, Yaphet Koto, Veronica Cartwright, Dean Stanton, and of course, introduced the world to the brilliant Sigourney Weaver. And I think that it's in one of I have like a list of Gothic movies, which they kind of change over time. And it is in my top 10 Gothic movies. And of course, it's also in my top 10 science fiction movies. So therefore so there's that crossover science fiction and the Gothic. So it's definitely my number one Gothic science fiction film. But I kind of want to cover the tropes. Remember, I talked about tropes in another video. And then I'll talk about how I think Alien fits these tropes. And again, the reason I'm talking about Alien is because Alien Romulus is coming out in theaters. As I record this video, next Friday on the 16th is when Alien Romulus comes out. And it's supposed to take place between the events of Alien and Aliens, directed by James Cameron, my second favorite Alien movie. And I obviously I think that'll just be the connection. I don't think Sigourney Weaver is going to be in it or anything like that, of course. But I just thought it would be an appropriate time to kind of talk about Alien and how I think it's a Gothic science fiction film. So, but just to cover the tropes of, as I've been talking about them, we have the grotesque, we have some sort of dark subject matter. These for Gothic movies. And again, there's probably tons of other tropes and there's tons of other themes and things like that. But these are just kind of ones that I like to highlight. The grotesque subject matter, the supernatural and or creatures, Gothic environments, whether these be desolate or remote, or a haunted mansion, or maybe an isolated spaceship. Persons in distress. When I first started investigating this trope, I kept coming up with women in distress. That was the thing that was being highlighted in all my research. So there's lots of films, obviously, that have women in distress, but I always like to say persons in distress, because as we know in this film, if you've seen it, all 7 crew members are in distress for sure. Another trope is that there's always a sense of isolation. That could be physical isolation, or it could be remote, it could be in the character's mind. And of course, suspense, mystery, tension, fear, dread, all those sorts of feelings and emotions. And then there's also sometimes there's heightened and exaggerated emotions. And I don't think I explained that in the tropes video when I talked about the tropes, but I don't necessarily mean exaggerated acting. That's not what I mean, but I just mean that since there's fear and panic and terror and all that involved, that the emotions are going to be heightened. The states of distress, it's going to be as opposed to just having a normal conversation, people are going to be panicking, they're going to be stressed, and that there's going to be tension. So that's what I mean when I talk about heightened, exaggerated emotion. So I don't mean like that they're acting, exaggerated like the movies from the the 40s or the 20s or whatever. Okay, and then sometimes now this trope doesn't necessarily this is not pertaining to Alien, but oftentimes there's characters who have some sort of psychic connection or ability or link to events that are going on, but not in Alien. There's no psychic connection. And oftentimes there's like what I call Gothic language, but it could be formalized language. And I think it's interesting for science fiction because in science fiction films, there is a kind of language that is particular to science fiction films because they're usually talking about some sort of technology that we don't yet have or did not maybe at the time the film was made. So it is a language all its own. But I think that this movie is pretty fascinating because even from the very inception of this, and we're not going to go over the entire history of this because there's plenty of documentaries and books that have been made about Ridley Scott and the making of Alien, et cetera. But one thing I do want to call out is that he was inspired by the artwork of H.R. Giger. And I have to tell you, Giger's art, it's like this weird psychosexual art. To me, it almost borders on the perverse. I tried reading one of his. I was in a bookstore one time, and I was looking in the art books, and I came across his book, the Necronomicon, I believe is what it's called, and it is an art book, and it is the inspiration that Ridley Scott had when I think he looked at this book, and it was these nightmarish images that were kind of sexual in nature, but then with these weird alien sorts of creatures and themes. And so the book is actually quite disturbing. I thought about buying it, but I was like, no, but it's great. It's a great book to read, to look at. And also, if you've looked at H.R. Geiger's, and I hope I'm pronouncing this, I can't remember if it's Geiger or Giger. If you look at his creations, his illustrations, all the artwork that he's come up with, there's always like a biomechanical organic sort of component that is in his work, and there's all these depictions of, dare I say, orifices, birth canals, and other things I have a hard time describing. So again, if you want to be disturbed, go check that book out. But if you really want to get a peek into Giger's mind, Giger, it's on you, and let me tell you, it's nightmare fuel. It's definitely disturbing. But let's go into the tropes as how I see them connecting to the movie Alien. First, I want to start with Gothic environments. The movie takes place in primarily two locations: planet LV-426, which we know from Aliens, in which they call Hadley's Hope. I don't call it Hadley's Hope because I don't like the special edition, but that's my problem. And then takes place on LV-426, and then in deep space aboard the commercial towing vessel, the Nostromo. And at the beginning of the movie, you see the Nostromo. It's actually pulling looks like a mining facility or whatever. That's the payload. That's the cargo that is pulling. But action takes place on the Nostromo. And then on the planet, there is a derelict space station. So that's why I say that the derelict spaceship or whatever, it's on LV-426 on the planet. And it's interesting because this is where the designs come into play. You can see that sort of the organic, also mechanized structures that the aliens have kind of, I don't know if they're secreting these things or whatever, because that's never really been explained in alien lore. And then, of course, in the cargo hold, there's thousands of egg-like structures. But what I find is interesting is that the appearance of the ship, the ship itself feels somewhat feminine, and it's interesting. And I don't know if, I can't go into Giger's into his mindset when he was creating these things. But what I do like is this is where the Gothic is really highlighted because there's always long, dim corridors. Okay, this is inside the alien spacecraft, and there are these like bone-like substances and tall cathedral ceilings or cathedral-like ceilings. And then that layer of mist, which is covering the eggs. And to me, when I looked at that, as I watched Alien over and over again, when I look at like the mist covering the eggs, there's something about it to me that reminds me of like shrouded moors or the force of any Gothic film. I watched the Lon Chaney version of The Wolfman from 1941, I think, with my son. It was an interesting experience. The movie's only 60 minutes. It's super short, maybe 63 minutes. But yeah, it was good. I mean, I liked it. I didn't like it that much as I did when I was a little kid. But I love the way that they showed the moors when the Wolfman was stalking through the moors, and there was always smoke and mist on the ground. And then so when I look at Alien, I kind of see that connection to old Gothic horror movies with the mist and tunnels and the cathedral-like ceilings. And even when the main actually moves back to the Nostromo, we also see these long, dark corridors, and all the spaces seem claustrophobic. There's steam, and there seems to be like constant moisture dripping in, and there's thousands of potential hiding places where the danger could be lurking. So now this leads me into the second trope, the grotesque, which was actually, I listed first on my tropes, but these are not in order by any means. The grotesque, because so Kane, when he goes into the ship, three of the crew members, Kane, Lambert, and Captain Dallas, they go to investigate the derelict space station. And I hope I'm not giving anything away because this movie's been out since 1979. So if you haven't seen it, I would stop watching the video now. I don't like to necessarily give out spoilers, but I mean, come on. The movie's been around for like 40 plus years. So they investigate the spaceship, and Kane goes down, and he sees like this egg structure that, inside all the eggs, and it's pulsing with light and liquid, and basically attaches itself to his face as he got too close. But the face hugger itself, it's slick and has like what I can only describe as gestational juices, and even that it's in its blood, it uses the oxygenated blood from its host, but there's also acid, which is that it uses as its blood. So it's an interesting creature, but it's really disgusting. And honestly, each phase of the alien is more grotesque than the next. And again, I want to give away a major plot point, but it's been out there for years. But there's one version of the alien that I will say that as it's gestating through in its human host, that it becomes quite it's given birth in the most violent way. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, just you watch any clip of Alien, I suggest you watch the whole movie. Watch on DVD though, on Blu-ray. It's fantastic. The colors look great. And then the final form of Alien is kind of like, I think it's like a grotesque parody of the human form. Now we know obviously there was this, a human performer who performed in Alien suit, but I love the way that like you get a sense it feels like it's familiar, but it's so alien as well. And it has a tail with a stinger that can impale a human, and a mouth within a mouth that has sharp, jagged teeth, and it projects itself outside with a swift striking motion. It's just so different, so familiar, but yet so alien that I think that's why that image has stuck around for so long. It's been so iconic. Then let's go on to dark subject matter, the next trope. Obviously, the crew is killed off. As they're killed off, I mean, it's that's obviously a dark subject matter because they're being killed off one by one and by an entity or this creature that hides in the dark, and they never know when it's going to attack them. The other tropes about the supernatural, there's no supernatural in this, but obviously there's a creature because the alien, it's an organic creature. We don't know where it came from, why it is, or why it does what it does. And I think what was really terrifying about this first film, even more so than James Cameron's film, was that we don't have information. I think that makes it more terrifying, that we don't know what this thing wants, why it does what it does, where it came from. And then in Aliens, James Cameron goes on to explain that a giant, the mother alien, she's laying these eggs. Well, where does she come from? I mean, so and then where does their race come from? And so there's those. What I love about Alien is that there's all these unanswered questions, and I think that plays into the terror and the horror that we see or we feel when watching the film, because there's no rational explanation to the xenomorph and why it does anything. And by the way, it's not called the xenomorph in this film. It's referred to as the xenomorph by one of the characters, I believe, in Alien. So in this one, it's just an alien. Now let's go to the trope about people in distress. Everyone's a victim in this film. Everyone. Ash, Kane, Lambert, Dallas, and Ripley. I mean, they're all victims. So I don't want to say that this is a film. This is not a film about a woman in distress, but we do know that in an interesting way that very similar to other horror films is that Ripley becomes what we now refer to as the final girl. I did not coin that phrase. I can't remember. There's a lady who wrote a book about horror films and the heroine who kind of makes it out at the end, and she coined the term final girl. But Ripley does become the final girl, the final heroine, the one who survives all the dangers and lives to kind of tell about it, obviously through subsequent films. But so in this film, everybody's in distress. It's not one woman character being chased, although at the end, it is definitely Ripley by herself. And then I mentioned another trope of sense of isolation or remoteness. It's definitely on the character's mind because in this film, they are isolated. They're in deep space and they land on an unfamiliar planet, and then they come back with an alien organism. They go back to their ship and they keep cruising, and lo and behold, now they're isolated on the ship with this unstoppable force. So they're isolated in every way possible, and there's no one coming to save them. So I think that's it. It's a perfect horror film in terms of that because it's self-contained. It does go down to the surface, but it's contained within the levels of the ship. And I think that's why that's another reason why it's resonated with audience over all these years. And then, of course, there's suspense, mystery, tension, fear. All of these are present, and all the characters are experiencing this. And then once the alien arrives to the ship, from that moment on, there's constant tension, and that tension ramps up, and it is sustained throughout the remainder of the runtime of the film. Of course, there's heightened, exaggerated emotions. And again, when I say exaggerated, I just mean in terms of that everybody's at a level of emotional distress because their crew members are being killed one by one. So, I mean, I think we'd be distressed if there were 7 of us and then we start dying out one by one. Yeah. So, and there's no psychic connections in this film. Remember, I talked about that characters there are no characters who possess a psychic connection. The alien doesn't have a psychic connection, so thank God for that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in this film, I wouldn't necessarily so there's no Gothic formalized language in terms of say something from a period piece from the 1800s or 1700s or something like that. But the crew of the Nostromo, they speak in crew terms. They say phrases to each other, especially when they're landing. That would be different from you and I talking about something. So we may not understand what they're talking about, but we know that they understand. They have a language. They have a nuance. They have a way of speaking because they're used to doing this. They're doing their jobs. And their jobs, I often heard the crew in Alien referred to as truckers in outer space. And maybe that was part of the initial pitch. But they're just driving the fuel haul, this oil refinery from point A to point B, and they probably do it. They've probably done it so many times that it's old hat for them. But I do think that instead of a Gothic sort of language, they do have what I would call a true language, or the language of science fiction films. So to me, as I'm recapping all these Gothic tropes in there, I think that Alien firmly falls within the sphere of a Gothic science fiction film. And I think all these tropes are, they're all there. I mean, and I want to go back to this. Alien, and I've heard it called this many times, is basically a haunted house in space. And that's what Sir Ridley Scott said. So for me, I think it's one of my favorite science fiction films, one of my favorite horror films, and it is one of my favorite Gothic science fiction films. And I'm sure there's others that I can think about, but I think it's a masterpiece in filmmaking, and it has stood the test of time. The effects still look fabulous. I mean, there's nothing about this film that detracts from the fact that it was made so long ago. So thank you very much for listening to this. And again, Alien Romulus is coming out next week by the time we film this video, and on the 16th of August. So I hope you go check it out, because I will definitely be there first in line. But thank you so much. And if you like this video, please comment, like, and subscribe. And I'm trying to grow this channel, but I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.